Hi, I'm Cecile Lawrence. Friday coming up, Friday, January 20th, is the second anniversary of the Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission Supreme Court case.
Can you tell me some of the issues that are in that case?
In that case, the Supreme Court, that I call the Supremes, held that corporations have First Amendment speech rights just like natural human beings.
In regards to, what's the context? They have free speech rights when?
They have free speech rights in regards to corporations giving as much money as they want to candidates for election. And that has caused a lot of problems with our so-called democracy.
What kind of problems?
Citizens United versus FEC has caused a lot of problems in that now corporations can spend as much money as they want in getting their candidate elected.
So my question is for you, what it's about. It's about that corporations can speak, unlimited money. What kind of problems has that caused, or do you anticipate it might cause?
It has caused something that you might have heard of called super PACs, in that there's an unlimited amount of money that anyone who has that amount of money can spend on political action committees to get their person elected.
So let's talk about some of the prior Supreme Court cases. Citizens United, this didn't just come out of the blue, did it? There's been some prior history here?
Citizens United did not come out of the blue, unlike what a lot of people seem to think. Citizens United did not give personhood to corporations, unlike what a lot of people think. This whole idea, this invention of corporations having personhood existed before Citizens United. There are a bunch of cases before, going way back into the 19th century, 17th century. The railroad cases, even before that, this whole issue of corporations supposedly having personhood has existed for a very, very long time, just that people weren't aware.
So Citizens United, some people say that Citizens United is an amalgam of two different cases. One goes all the way back, like you said, to the 19th century case, Southern Pacific Railroad, or Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad. But also, the other one was Buckley versus Vallejo. Can you speak about Buckley at all?
Buckley versus Vallejo gave First Amendment speech rights to money. The thing about those cases, and the Buckley case is not the only case that has caused problems, in that if you look at the whole line of Supreme Court cases dealing with money being speech, what it boils down to is that money is speech for wealthy people, not for people of limited means. For example, there's a case dealing with the Hare Krishna people, which are not so popular now, but they were popular then, begging for money in airports. They weren't allowed to do so, whereas people who were more part of the establishment, more part of the power elite, they were given the money is speech right. So money is speech for some people and not for other people, thanks to our Supreme Court.
So can you talk a little bit about what is the nature of, a corporation? We had Mitt Romney just recently, on several occasions now, he has made the statement, he's running for president, he's made the statement on several occasions now that corporations are people. He says that corporations are just a group of people. When a corporation makes money, it's the directors that make it, they spend it in their communities. So my question to you is, what is the issue with corporations? What's all that about?
There are many issues with corporations being perceived to be persons, and what people like Mitt Romney are trying to do is to try to essentially brainwash us into believing that what he says is true, that corporations are people. Right now we have the fiction that corporations are people and have under the 14th Amendment. But if you look at it really, how can a corporation be a person? A corporation is a piece of paper. Doesn't have flesh, doesn't have blood, doesn't have eyes or ears. the general person on the street, the ordinary human being, you and I, when we hear the word person, we think of a live, flesh and blood human being. So for somebody like Mitt Romney to say that corporations are people, he's just trying to mess with our minds. He's trying to say, well, because corporations are made up of people, then they're people. That's false logic. That's confusing logic, and it doesn't work. It's not logic at all.
And it's not true.
It's not true. It's not true because what's our definition of a person? A person is somebody who, as I said before, has eyes and ears and tongue and cheek and flesh and blood, not a piece of paper.
So a corporation legally has a legal identity apart from the people that are the owners. Yeah.
A corporation has a legal identity as a person apart from the people who work at the corporation or who own the corporation.
And they even call it an artificial person or a legal fiction, right?
It's a legal fiction or an artificial person. But what makes it even more outrageous, if you think about it carefully, a corporation is more than a person, because a corporation can't die the way human beings die. In fact, you could say what the Supreme Court did was to give corporations divinity. And that is really astounding and outrageous, considering that this country considers itself a God-fearing country. To say that the corporations are equal to God is just outrageous. And that's what they've done, even though they haven't said so, but in fact, that's what they've done.
They've made it a person that has perpetual life.
Correct.
So, people have made the analogy, if corporations are a person, what kind of a person are they? Can you talk about that at all? It's like corporations are involved in all this, mining, extractive industries, the boreal forest is destroying this, massive, the size of Massachusetts or something, right? Up in Alberta, Canada, this XL pipeline that's coming through. I mean, the most massive incursions upon the landscape, are being caused in pollution. So, and these cause actual, violence and harm to living things. I mean, what do we call people that, can you talk about that at all?
Some of you, maybe a lot of you, might have seen some YouTube videos that went into exactly this issue of what kind of a quote-unquote person is this so-called corporate person. And if you look at the DSM categories for people with psychopathologies, the conclusion that they came to, that the kind of person that is a corporate person is a psychopathic person. The kinds of behaviors, and someone who does a lot of harm, who takes no responsibility, who lies, who cheats, who steals, who has no morals, that is the kind of person that a corporation is. And so we really have to get rid of this kind of person. And we don't have to involve in any killing or any murder, because it's not a real person anyway.
So that's a very interesting thing. Here we have, maybe you can contrast these two things if you want to, but I'm thinking about, here we have Tim DeChristopher, and an environmental, what do you want to call him? He was like a monkey wrencher. He basically jammed this system where they were trying to auction off public lands out west for oil and gas mining rights. Tim DeChristopher, in a brilliant and completely solo act, he goes in there and lies. And he says that he's to whoever, bidder 71 or something, and he, they give him a number, and he says he's got a lot of money. He starts, bidding on these public lands, but he doesn't have any money. Basically, his crime is lying, and he's in jail right now for it. But then we have the case, Nike versus Kasky, where basically somebody took a lawsuit against Nike for making false claims in an ad, and the Supreme Court said a corporation has a right to lie under the First Amendment. So do you feel like can you contrast those two things at all? It's like lying for a person can end you up in jail, or lying for a corporation, there's no consequences. And especially, like you said, a corporation, you can't jail a fiction.
You can't jail a piece of paper. If we keep remembering that this corporate person is nothing more than a piece of paper that the Supreme Court has given a horrendous amount of power to, then maybe we can get a handle on this, on why Tim DeChristopher is handled one way, and prosecuted by our own government into ending up in jail right now, whereas corporations that do a lot of harm, that create pollution, that result in people, in actual real human beings getting sick and dying, and putting poisonous products on the market for us to eat or put on our faces, poisoning our waters, that's okay. So you see that there's something really rotten going on right now, that we have this system that protects corporations when they harm real human beings, but when a real human being is trying to protect other real human beings, then our government comes down on the side of the corporations and puts that person in jail. So that's why we have to stop this. And that's why we need to educate people, inform people that there is something rotten going on, and we need to have a constitutional amendment to end corporate personhood. Some of you might have heard of Tim DeChristopher. I hope a lot of you have heard about Tim DeChristopher, that he decided he was very upset about the sale of public lands or park lands for oil and gas mining, and there was an auction going on of some of these lands to corporations for them to engage in oil and gas mining, and he decided he was going to put a stop to this, to step in the way of this juggernaut. And at the auction he started bidding, even though he had nowhere near the amount of money required to bid on these lands. And lo and behold, he was a winning bid. His bid was a winning bid. And when the people running the auction determined that he did not have the money to pay his bid, he was arrested and taken to court and is now in jail because of that. The point is that he was doing something not for his own benefit, absolutely not for his own benefit, but for the benefit of the rest of us. And he's now in jail. Whereas corporations that do bad acts for their own benefit against the benefit of our interests, our alive human being interests, they don't get put in jail.
Can you talk a little bit about the Friday events? What's going on Friday? I know you want to talk about that.
What's going on Friday is the marking of the second anniversary of the Citizens United versus FEC case. And there is an organization that was formed around this need to have a constitutional amendment to strip personhood from corporations. This organization is called Move to Amend. You might want to look them up, movetoamend.org. Well, they have been working for some time to get people energized and informed about this assault on our freedoms and our lives. And they have gotten together with volunteers in places all across the country to mark this second anniversary of Citizens United by having a rally and various events on January 20th and January 21st of this year in Binghamton, in front of the federal building at noon, 12 p.m. In the middle of the day, we will be having a rally with people giving speeches and sharing information as to what has happened in the past, what's happening now, and what we can do now and in the future in order to take back our rights as human beings, and take those human being rights away from a piece of paper.
Okay, so once again, when and where? What time? What's the date? Just when and where and what?
This event is called Occupy the Courts, because we need to occupy the court system to change this, and the legislative system to take away personhood from corporations. It's in Binghamton at 12 noon this coming Friday, the January the 20th at noon, 12 p.m. in front of the federal building on Henry Street in Binghamton. Coming up next, you'll see David Cobb, who is a lawyer from Texas, now working with Move to Amend, who will be who was speaking here late last year. and he is the national spokesperson for a move to amend on the need for us to get rid of corporate personhood and to have a constitutional amendment to actually do that. This will be a huge task, a huge thing to do, to actually have a constitutional amendment. And you might have heard of some movement in Congress and so on to actually do this. And there are various bills that are being passed around to think about having this constitutional amendment. But the position of Move to Amend is that this is our one shot. Once we get enough people across the nation, enough cities and people energized and mobilized to be pushing for this constitutional amendment, we need to have our best bill, our best writing of this. And the Move to Amend organization feels that their version of bill to strip personhood from corporations is the best one, because this is going to be our only shot.
So it strips personhood, but does it also deal with the money equals speech issue from Buckley?
It deals with everything. It deals with the whole enchilada, so to speak, or this whole rotten enchilada of corporations having human rights in a way. What is particularly bad and offensive about corporate personhood is that it's based on the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And you probably know that the 14th Amendment gave personhood, which they already had. It couldn't say they gave them personhood, but it recognized the personhood in former enslaved human beings. But if you do a little research, you'll find out that cases since that time, since the time of the Santa Clara Railroad case, which started to perpetuate this idea of corporate personhood, more cases dealing with the 14th Amendment rights of personhood have been focused on corporations than on African Americans. I think African Americans and Latinos and whoever, especially, should be outraged, should be offended, insulted, and disgusted that the amendment to the Constitution that recognized their inherent personhood is being used more to give personhood to corporations, not for the rights of African Americans.
In fact, I've heard Richard Grossman and I think maybe some other people from POCLAD talking about the fact that this, the timing of the Santa Clara case in relation to the passage of the 13th and the 14th Amendment was so close in time that it was just a way of basically perpetuating this slave class mentality and the aristocracy of the slave owners. It was a way of transferring their wealth to this new system that basically now enslaves all working class people. So the slave class actually, because of the Citizens United or because of the Santa Clara County case, it's actually basically expanded. Yeah.
Yes, what the idea, the fiction of corporate personhood has done in connection with the 14th Amendment is that it's taken the 14th Amendment, which was supposed to recognize personhood in enslaved African Americans, and expanded that idea of the inherent inferiority of African Americans to all of us. That the only people who are worth anything are the wealthy, and the wealthy who own corporations and run corporations. The rest of us, you and I, no matter what our color, our skin, our creed, or so on, we are now put in the position of slaves to the system, slaves to corporatism, slaves to working the way they're working, the way they want us to work.
I'm going to throw this at you to see how...
We could connect the Occupy the Courts thing with the Occupy movement.
Cecile, you read my mind. So basically, here's my question. How does this, and does it, the whole Citizens United, the corporate personhood thing, how does it connect to the Occupy movement? Because that ostensibly has been the biggest worldwide social movement that we've seen in 20 years or something, right? It's huge, this Occupy movement. Are they connected at all?
The Occupy movement is connected to this Move to Amend movement in many ways, because for those of you who know anything correct about the Occupy Wall Street movement, it is a movement started because of partly because of the economic crash, and then people becoming more aware of what were the, not just the immediate causes, but the root causes of the economic crash, that an increasingly enormous gap between the very wealthy, the so-called 1% or even less than 1%, and the rest of us, that Occupy Wall Street refers to as the 99%. This is a system that has been going on for not just the last 2 years, but what has happened with Occupy Wall Street is that it has brought us to the realization, has woken us up out of our slumber or nightmare, depending on how you want to term it, that we have always been the 99%. Not just in the last 2 years, not just when Occupy Wall Street started. So that's the good thing about Occupy Wall Street, in that they have woken us up, made us more aware, brought onto the front pages, in spite of the resistance of the mainstream media, that we have been enslaved, that we are the 99%, and it's time for us to push back and to say, not anymore. So this is why Move to Amend decided that they were going to give the name of Occupy the Courts to these events on Friday the 20th and Saturday the 21st of this year, because there is a connection between this. In order to get back in order to have a better recognition of the rights of human beings and the rights of people and the needs of people who have done everything that they were told to do in order to succeed in this system, that is to study hard, eat properly, go to school, go to college. And what the system has done to them is told them, tough, you did everything we told you to do, tough, you don't have a job now, tough. So part of the criticism that some of the 1% have made of Occupy Wall Street is that they're not working. Well, the reason they're not working is because there are no jobs. And why are there no jobs? Is because the 1% have taken away many of the jobs. They've sent them to other countries where people are working for next to nothing. And the products from those countries then come here, which often are in very poor quality, will break apart. And when you throw them out because they're broken, then that pollutes the planet even more. And so you go and buy more of these shoddy products. It's a vicious cycle that we're trapped in, and we have to stop that. So that's why there's a natural connection between the Move to Amend and the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Can you tell me a little bit about what is the process for creating a constitutional amendment? It's not easy, is it? Can you speak to what's...
It's not easy to get the movement going for a constitutional amendment. This is why we're having this rally this Friday, and there's also a teaching in Ithaca on Saturday, and similar events all across the country. First, we need to let as many people as possible know about corporate personhood, the need to change this, the need to get cities and towns have a resolution against corporate personhood passed within their cities, and if they have a ballot system or a referendum system, which we don't have in New York State, we don't have a referendum system, but whatever you have in your own state, to use that system in order to get more awareness out there as to corporate personhood and the need to get rid of it. And to get cities like Binghamton to pass an ordinance recognizing the need to have a constitutional amendment to get rid of corporate personhood. Once we have enough, say, half of the cities throughout the United States with amendments like this, that's why we need a lot of people on board with this, then we will then take it to Congress in order to have the Move to Amend bill sponsored by someone put forward to show them that, yes, we have the majority of the people of the United States, the entire country, pushing for this. You need to do this. You need to push for this. And you need to push for the best version of the bill to move to amend the Constitution to get rid of corporate personhood.
So this really requires, it requires a supermajority of the state legislature, right? Of the state legislature, yeah. Let's see. We talked about corporate rule. Do you have what other thoughts do you have about this corporate personhood issue, the Occupy the Courts? Is there anything else that you feel we haven't?
Well, I just want to remind people that corporations are not people, that we need to end the corporate rule because they rule us right now. Essentially, corporations are the government in the United States, and they're trying to make it a global thing. And to come on this Friday to outside the federal building at noon to be with us and to celebrate your progress towards freedom and out of slavery from corporate rule.
Can you hold that up one more time?
Sure.
Just hold it up for a second, and I want to. Okay, so you started talking about the media, and I want to know if you can, because the media is supposed to be, the broadcast airwaves is supposed to be a public commons. And I think that if we really trace back, I know that we can go all the way even back to we can go back to the Greeks, I think, and find the origins of capitalism and property and ownership of things. But wasn't it true that the Middle Ages was a huge expansion of the notion of property, and that was the enclosure movement? Where, I mean, can you connect the enclosure movement with modern day times of when people are being evicted from parks, which is supposed to be? We just had Matt Ryan in Binghamton evict these Occupy people from a public park. That's supposed to be a commons. I understand if you can get evicted by the owner from private property, but what's the idea of being evicted from a public commons? Isn't that the idea of a public? And then we've got the broadcast airwaves. You're talking about how bad the media is doing. Isn't that a kind of enclosure? We have this public commons. I've been trying to get a local broadcast TV show or a radio show for like 10 years now. Even WSKG blows me off. Public broadcasting. Wait a minute, we own this thing? We own the parks, but we can't get access to the park. We can't use the parks. We own the airwaves, but we can't get access. Can you connect that all together?
The issue of what's public and what's private is a complex issue, but we can boil it down to some basic ideas about fairness and justice. So long ago, and I'm not going to give a big history lesson here, but just have a little context. Long ago, and as is true of the United States, so many things started off in England. We had the lords and ladies in their manners, and then we had the rest of the people, the peasants. And the peasants were allowed to, part of the system was that peasants could go off and shoot for food, pheasants or whatever, rabbits, whatever was out there, and that was not illegal. They could do that. They could also have maybe some small gardens in forests, and that was not illegal. There's this idea of the commons. As with the introduction of industrialization, the idea of what public and what private became more congealed, and there were fewer areas that were perceived to be public because, of course, the people who were in power had more strength and power to say, well, okay, where you consider that you could go and hunt and shoot for food before, sorry, it's no longer available to you. It's now private. Keep off.
And they built fences, right?
Yeah, you enclose it, you put fences around it. So no wonder a lot of these people had difficulty finding food and came to the United States. So what did they do? They come to the United States and they seeking freedom from the system of loss of the commons, loss of their ability to feed themselves and their families by going off into the forest and hunting and for animals to eat.
Yeah, let's talk about the gardening too. I'm not so much into the hunting, but because I knew it had to do with there was like common lands that people would
they could grow their own vegetables and maybe have fruit and berries and so on. But this idea of, well, you can't grow anything unless you own the land where you're growing it. You can't build a little hut there unless you own the land. This is not a natural concept. This is a created concept. Not every culture has this.
Or you can continue growing your crops if you pay the tax to the Lord, right?
You can continue growing crops, but because where you're growing it now is no longer the commons, no longer public land, but now is has become private and owned by the person up there in the big house, in the manor and so on, then you had to start paying rent, which before you didn't have to do. So this is a totally artificially created system. They bring this system with the irony of this is that the people who are fleeing this system brought this system with them to the United States and imposed this system onto the people who are living here already, otherwise known as Native Americans or indigenous people or Indians. Because they had a system here similar, the people who are living here before had a system of the commons where everything was shared and there was no notion of private property. So I just want to remind people this notion of private property is an invented notion. This notion of property belonging to corporations is an invented, created notion.
So just the idea of ownership is invented.
The idea of ownership is an invented notion. The idea was public and private are all invented notions, and just as they were invented, you can uninvent them. So what the Occupy Wall Street people are trying to remind us in occupying, they're having the right to occupy pieces of property which now are declared to be public, like parks. Or they're primarily focusing on parks to start with. So they started at Zuccotti Park in New York City. And the funny thing about Zuccotti Park goes to show that the young people, the old people, the in-between, middle-aged people, people of all ages, the babies, who put up tents at Zuccotti Park. Zuccotti Park is not your ordinary idea of park. It's a slab of granite on a slope. So you think of the determination of these people to put up tents on a slab of granite that's on a slope and trying to sleep there. And they did so for some time until they were evicted. And people across the nation have, across the US, in different kinds of places that are called public parks, whether they're a slab of granite or they actually have dirt and grass and trees there. Including Binghamton. So the little area that the Occupy Binghamton people set up their tents on has some grass and some benches. And for a while they were there and were not disturbed. And the impression they had was that the city administration didn't have a problem with them being there. In fact, city administration or any administration shouldn't have a problem with them being there anyway because it's a public park. But from what I hear, they were just this past week evicted on the grounds that it was a health or safety issue for them to continue there. The thing is, you can get around these health and safety issues because if you can construct a yurt, you can have it heated in a way that's safe. There are ways of getting around this issue, of dealing with this issue, the saying that you don't have to make the property into private property when it's really public property. It's the commons.
I just have a couple more questions that I think might be relevant.
Okay.
So I guess one thing is, so you mentioned Zuccotti Park has been evicted, Binghamton's been evicted, Albany has been evicted, Occupy Albany. I mean, are there any of these occupies? And we're in the winter time. What would you say about around the U.S.? Have a large number of these occupies been evicted? or what? Do you have any stats on that you could share?
The Occupy groups that have been evicted tend to be, as far as I know, the ones are in the colder parts of the country, of the U.S. And you could say, well, it's reasonable, it's cold, you got to get them out of there. But as I mentioned before, there are ways that we can deal with being in the cold, living in the cold. People have done it for a long time. Yurts aren't a new invention, or tents aren't a new invention. There are ways of dealing with living in the cold. And you could say, well, why live in the cold when you don't have to? Well, because there is a principle involved here, a principle of what's private and what's public. And we want to maintain the right to be in a place that's public, no matter what the heating situation may be, because you can you can alleviate the heating situation without losing your rights to be in that be on that piece of land or that park.
What is, getting back to the Citizens United response, move to amend, there have been, I mean, I'm just looking for like a status of what's going on in other states. Do we have any states yet that are passing local bans on corporate personhood? I know there are maybe some local cities. I think I remember reading there's a few local cities that have maybe Los Angeles. I don't know. There's some big cities I've heard of that have been passing these resolutions against corporate personhood. So I'm just looking for a summary of what's going on nationwide with this thing.
What's going on nationwide right now is that there is movement in different cities towards having a resolution denying personhood to corporations. New York City recently had success in having such a resolution passed, and the idea, the goal, the purpose of the Move to Amend movement is to increase the number of cities that are having these resolutions passed. Now, a resolution is just a resolution. What we really want is something stronger than a resolution. But first you have to start with baby steps by informing people, then getting enough people involved, then having enough people to work on a resolution, getting the resolution passed, then increasing the number of cities that have resolutions passed, then working towards actually having the amendment passed.
So this is just the resolution, even though it's non-binding. The resolution is a vital part of the overall organization to get the constitutional. You just can't pass the constitutional amendment overnight. You got to do a lot of grassroots organizing, and that's really what's going on here is the grassroots.
Yeah. What we are doing by having this event this Friday, we are participating in this nationwide movement towards the amending of the U.S. Constitution to take away personhood rights from corporations. Keeping in mind that we know that this will be a long fight, but it will be an exciting fight, and it will be a worthwhile fight, a worthwhile effort, because we can no longer live or try to live with corporate personhood because it has caused too much damage to the lives of too many people. We have to make a change. We can't accept the status quo. We have to say that corporations don't have personhood, that corporations are not people. And we need to keep saying that over and over and louder until we get enough of a critical mass of people saying, we want the change and we want it now. And the change we want is the elimination of the fiction, of the invention of corporate personhood. We need it.
So the last question that I have to ask here is, has to do with, you and I actually took Daniel Pinnock Democracy School from CELDF at the same time. It was about getting close to 10 years ago now, right? 8 years ago? And Richard Grossman and Tom Lindsay, wow. I mean, that was like, the two inventors of the Democracy School, the developers of it. That was quite a privilege. But I think if you'd gone back to, when was that, 2003, 2004, somewhere around that time frame, if you talked to the average person on the street and talked about corporate personhood, back then, I think that people would like look at you funny. It's like, what are you talking about here? But now, largely because of this is the strange thing about social movements. Sometimes things start getting better right at the point when they seem to be the worst. So here we have Citizens United coming along. That's like this really horrible decision. We even had Obama during his State of the Union address. He had the Supreme Court right there. He's admonishing. This was like unheard of. So I'm just wondering, what's your feel? Are you optimistic for this thing? It just seems to me like there's a massive movement building over this, and I personally am shocked by it, considering nobody knew about this, 8 years ago.
What we're seeing here in operation with the Occupy Wall Street movement and also the Move to Amend movement is the power of the people. And we can't ever forget the power, and we can't ever forget the power of the people, and we should always remember not to get discouraged, even though when things look bad, like the passage of the Citizens United case, that people, if you give them the opportunity, can understand what's going on. It's just to give them encourage them to have the strength to actually work on making the change that needs to be done. So that's why we're here. That's why I'm speaking to you today, to encourage you to get connected with other people, as many people as you can, to get involved, to get informed, and to sign the petition that's online to have the elimination of corporate personhood.
Can you just tell us what the website is? And I'll put a graphic underneath when you say it.
If you go to the movetoamend.org website, you will find lots of information. You'll find information that involves what I was just telling you, information that you'll be getting from David Cobb, of the national spokesperson for Move to Amend. And you'll also find a petition that we're encouraging and asking people to sign to say that you're on board with this movement to get rid of corporate personhood. But if you just basically want the information that you need in order to know what you want to do, you go to the movetoamend.org website and you will get all the information there. You're watching O2E TV, open to everyone, based in Binghamton, New York. And the existence of this is the reason why you're able to get this kind of information. It's public access television. Remember, I was telling you about public and private earlier and how crucial it is to have public access. So this is public access to information, public access to media. O2E TV, open to everyone.
Great. Beautiful. That's a wrap. Thank you. Perfect. All right, we're done.
Thank you, Bill, for doing this.